A Christmas meeting. The cold winter breeze of London bit at Angelina Jolie's exposed skin as she sat in the back of her sleek black limousine. The contrast of the chilly London streets against the warmth of the plush interior of the vehicle made her feel somewhat out of place. Wrapped in a luxurious white coat, her fingers clutched her notes for the upcoming gala, her thoughts drifting to the speech she would deliver in less than 2 hours. The event was important, honoring fellow actors who used their platform to push for positive change. But at that moment, the weight of her celebrity status seemed distant and irrelevant. The limo glided through the bustling streets of London on Christmas Eve, passing by festive lights and the crowds that flocked to various Christmas markets across the city. There was something calming about the sound of the busy city mixed with the soft hum of the limousine's engine, but a subtle unease started to settle in. Angelina's assistant, sitting across from her, tapped away on a tablet, finalizing event details and confirming schedules with the organizers. Her bodyguards were seated silently, their eyes scanning the area through the windows, ever watchful, but for now, everything felt calm. As the vehicle moved through the heart of the city, the entrance to a Christmas market caught Angelina's attention. The large sign, Unity Christmas Village, was adorned with sparkling lights, welcoming people from all walks of life. The atmosphere outside felt so far removed from the world she was headed toward. She glanced at the clock on her diamond-encrusted watch. There was still time. The idea blossomed in her mind so suddenly it felt almost instinctual. "Let's stop by the market," she said, her voice cutting through the quiet of the car. Her assistant looked up, a little taken aback. "Miss Jolie, the event organizers requested your arrival an hour before the gala begins. There's a strict schedule," she said, her voice filled with concern. Angelina's smile remained, but there was firmness in her gaze. "I'll take the risk," she replied. "I want to see the market." The bodyguards exchanged uneasy glances, already preparing for potential complications. They knew the risks of an unplanned stop, especially in a less affluent area with a high-profile client like Angelina. But the decision was made. They arrived at the market's edge, parking discreetly just out of sight. As Angelina stepped out of the limousine, the cold air enveloped her, stark against the warmth of the vehicle. Snowflakes swirled around her as she walked toward the entrance, her boots crunching lightly on the fresh snow. The world around her felt both foreign and familiar at the same time. The simple joy of families bundled up in scarves, children laughing, and the warm glow of Christmas lights contrasted with her own isolated reality of fame and expectation. For the first time in a while, she felt like just another person in the crowd, and the anonymity was both refreshing and slightly unsettling. The market was alive with activity. People roamed the aisles, sampling food and handcrafted ornaments, the sweet smells of roasted chestnuts, mulled wine, and cinnamon filling the air. The vibrant colors of scarves and hats created a warm tapestry against the snowy backdrop. It was a far cry from the glamorous world of Hollywood she often inhabited, and yet it resonated with her. It was a place where joy and struggle coexisted in a fragile balance. As she moved through the market, her eyes softened as she observed people simply existing. The elderly man selecting chestnuts from the fire, the young couple debating over a Christmas ornament, the children pulling their parents toward toy displays. These small moments made her heart swell, reminding her of the very reason she had worked so hard in her career. Behind the lights and the cameras, she had always felt a pull to make a difference, to bridge the gap between the haves and the have-nots. Here, in this humble market, she felt a sense of peace and purpose. Her quiet exploration led her toward the heart of the market, where she noticed a small figure moving skillfully through the crowd. A young girl, no older than 10, wore a bright red Santa outfit, the fabric well-worn and faded, her small hands clutching a basket filled with homemade cakes. There was something undeniably charming about her, despite the evident signs of hardship in her attire. Her bright eyes sparkled with a mixture of excitement and hope as she called out to passers-by, her voice carrying above the din of the busy market, "Cakes. freshly baked. Come get your cakes. As Angelina watched the girl navigate through the crowd, her heart tightened. There was an urgency in the child's movements, a determination in her steps that seemed far too mature for her young age. She was hustling, but not like a child playing in the snow. This was the hustle of someone who had learned that survival depended on seizing every opportunity, no matter how small. Intrigued, Angelina took a few steps toward the girl, her eyes drawn to the little basket of cakes. The girl approached, offering one of the cakes with a shy smile, her voice barely audible over the bustling crowd. Would you like to buy a cake? It's fresh, carrot cake. Angelina noticed the girl's small hands trembling slightly, her fingers chilled by the winter air. Despite the girl's cheerful demeanor, there was something about her, the way she held herself, the nervousness in her movements, that suggested all was not as it seemed. The cake was soggy, no doubt due to the damp winter air, but the sincerity in the girl's eyes made it impossible for Angelina to turn her down. I'd love to buy one, she said, her voice warm and inviting. She reached into her purse and pulled out a generous amount of cash, handing it to the girl. The money was far more than the price of the cake, but Angelina wanted to give more. The girl's eyes widened as she took the money, her mouth opening in surprise. Without thinking, the girl suddenly threw her arms around Angelina in an unexpected hug. Thank you, she whispered, her voice soft and sincere. God bless you. Angelina, caught off guard, returned the hug with a warmth she didn't expect to feel. In that brief moment, the world around her seemed to pause. The sound of the market faded, and all she could feel was the tiny, fragile frame of the girl in her arms. Her bodyguards, who had been alert in watchful moments before, relaxed slightly. They were used to dealing with crowds and the occasional fan, but this was different. There was something about this interaction that felt raw, real, and urgent. When the girl pulled away, she looked at Angelina with a mixture of gratitude and something else, a sense of longing that the actress couldn't quite place. Angelina bent down to the girl's level, her curiosity piqued. What's your name? She asked gently. Sophia, the girl replied, her voice shy but strong. Sophia. Such a beautiful name, Angelina said with a smile, reaching out to gently touch Sophia's hair. The softness of the gesture was almost instinctual, and she felt a surge of affection for the girl in front of her. But the feeling was quickly overshadowed by another, more troubling thought. Why was this young girl out here alone? Why was she working in the market on Christmas Eve? Do you make these cakes yourself? Angelina asked, trying to learn more about the girl's life. Sophia nodded, her small face uncertain. My aunt makes them, she said after a pause, her eyes flickering nervously. I sell them, yes. Angelina's mind raced. Where were Sophia's parents? Why wasn't anyone watching over her? And what was this mention of an aunt? Something felt off, but before she could ask further, a voice interrupted their conversation. Sophia. The voice was harsh, angry, and unmistakably threatening. Angelina stood up quickly, instinctively placing herself between the girl and the approaching figure. The market, which had seemed so festive moments ago, now felt cold and tense. Sophia's face went from one of joy and warmth to one of pure fear. Her body stiffened, and she took a half step back, trying to shrink away from the man's presence. The man stormed toward them, his face twisted in a snarl. His clothing was ragged, his face bloodshot, and his hands were balled into fists. He was a stark contrast to the joyful atmosphere around them, and his menacing presence made everyone take notice. Without hesitation, he shoved past Angelina's bodyguards, barely glancing at them as he grabbed Sophia's arm roughly, his grip tight and unyielding. What are you doing here, wasting time with one customer? He snapped at the girl. His voice was low, filled with contempt, as he yanked Sophia away from Angelina. You think I'm going to let you waste my time? Angelina's protective instincts kicked in. Let go of her, she commanded, her voice firm and sharp. Who are you? The man turned his angry gaze on Angelina, sneering at her elegant appearance. "None of your business," he spat. "Let go of my daughter." As the situation rapidly escalated, the tension was palpable. Something was terribly wrong, and Angelina knew she couldn't stand idly by. She couldn't just be another celebrity passing by. She had to act. This wasn't just an incident of a child misbehaving. This was something deeper, something more sinister. She stepped forward again, standing tall and resolute. "I won't let you hurt her," she said, her voice unwavering. "This is abuse, and I won't walk away from it." What happened next would change not only Sophia's life, but also Angelina's forever. Beneath the surface, the scene in the bustling Christmas market was no longer filled with holiday cheer. The festive lights that twinkled overhead seemed to dim as the tension in the air thickened, and the energy of the crowd shifted. What had been a joyful celebration of the season now felt like a stage for a darker drama, one that Angelina could not walk away from. As the man continued to drag Sophia away, her small form stumbling and trying to keep up, Angelina's heart clenched. She could see the girl's eyes, wide, frightened, and desperate for help. The moment when their eyes locked, Angelina felt an undeniable surge of responsibility. Sophia was more than just a child in distress. She was someone in danger, someone whose life was being controlled by a force far more sinister than a simple angry parent. Angelina's bodyguards flanked her, their postures rigid as they moved to intercept the man. One of them stepped forward, his hand raised in warning. "Let her go," he said, his voice low and commanding. "This is your last warning." The man stopped, only for a brief moment, his eyes narrowing into a glare that could have cut through steel. "I don't take orders from anyone, especially not a bunch of fancy bodyguards," he sneered, his voice filled with venom. Without warning, he yanked harder on Sophia's arm, causing the girl to cry out in pain. Angelina instinctively moved forward, her bodyguards hesitating for a moment before following her lead. She placed herself squarely between the man and the girl, refusing to let him take her away. The man looked at her for the first time as though seeing her, but it was not recognition that filled his eyes, only contempt. "You think you're going to stop me?" he spat, his voice trembling with rage. "You think you can save her? I'll show you what happens when you meddle in things you don't understand." Angelina stood her ground, her voice calm but firm. "You're hurting her. You need to let go of her, right now." Sophia, still clutching her basket of cakes, remained silent, her gaze fixed on the ground. Angelina's heart broke at the sight of the girl's surrender, her innocence fading under the weight of a life she didn't deserve. The actress knew she had to do something more, something beyond just standing there. The urgency of the situation echoed in her mind. "Who are you?" Angelina demanded, her voice unwavering. "What's your relationship with her? This is not how any parent should act." The man's eyes flickered with irritation, but there was something deeper there, something cold and calculating. He looked down at the girl for a moment, as though seeing her for the first time in a while, before answering with bitterness. "I'm her father," he said, the words sharp and bitter, as though they were forced out of him. "And I'll do what I have to keep her in line." Sophia's eyes widened at his words, and she took a half step back, her body visibly trembling as she tried to pull away from him. It was the first sign of defiance she had shown all night, but it was not enough to free her from his grasp. Angelina's mind raced. If this man was indeed Sophia's father, why did it feel like there was more to the story? Why did she feel a sense of dissonance between his words and his actions? The instinct she had learned over the years in her humanitarian work was telling her that this wasn't simply a case of parental discipline gone wrong. This was something far darker. The crowd had begun to notice the commotion, whispers rippling through the onlookers as they slowed their pace to witness the unfolding drama. The market, which had been alive with laughter and chatter just moments before, now felt like a stage for this troubling encounter. "Get out of the way," the man barked, his hand tightening around Sophia's arm, dragging her toward the edge of the market. His face was red with rage, and there was a crazed look in his eyes as he tried to shove past the bodyguards. But Angelina refused to move. She stayed rooted in place, the weight of the situation pressing heavily on her chest. "No," she said firmly. "Not until you let go of her." The bodyguards moved into action, stepping forward with authority. One of them tried to place a hand on the man's shoulder, to pull him away from the girl. But before he could do so, the man swung his free arm violently, knocking the bodyguard back with a force that surprised even the security team. "Don't touch me," he screamed. "You don't know anything about us." Angelina stepped closer, her bodyguards now flanking her on both sides. The crowd had started to part, creating a wide space around the confrontation. People stared from a distance, unsure of what to do, but unwilling to intervene. Angelina's gaze never left the man, who was now seething with rage. "I don't care what you think you know," the man growled, his grip tightening even more on Sophia's arm. "She's mine. I'm going to make sure she doesn't forget her place. You can't save her. No one can." Sophia flinched at his words, and Angelina felt a surge of anger rise within her. This wasn't a parent disciplining their child. This was control, abuse, and manipulation on a level that made her stomach churn. She could feel the weight of the situation pulling at her, knowing that if she didn't act now, she might lose the opportunity to help the girl who was clearly in danger. "I'm not going to let you do this," Angelina said, her voice steady, but filled with determination. "I don't care what your excuses are. You're hurting her, and that ends now." The man's eyes darted around, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face for just a moment. But before he could respond, the sound of sirens filled the air. Angelina's heart skipped a beat. The crowd began to shift nervously as the sirens grew louder. Within moments, a police car arrived at the edge of the market, its lights flashing brightly against the night. A group of officers stepped out, their eyes scanning the crowd as they made their way toward the scene. "Step away from the child," one of the officers commanded, his voice firm. The other officers flanked him, their hands on their weapons as they approached the man. For a split second, the man hesitated, his grip loosening on Sophia's arm. It was all the opening Angelina needed. "Let her go," Angelina repeated, her voice commanding. She turned to the officers. "This man is hurting this child. He's her father, but what he's doing is abuse. You need to arrest him." The officers moved swiftly, their hands grabbing hold of the man's arms and pulling him away from Sophia. The man struggled, growling and cursing, but it was no use. He was outnumbered and outmatched. Within moments, he was cuffed and led toward the police car. Sophia, who had been frozen in fear just moments before, looked up at Angelina with wide eyes. Her small face was streaked with tears, but there was something else there, something more than just fear. There was relief. "Are you okay?" Angelina asked softly, kneeling down to Sophia's level. The little girl nodded, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm okay," she said, her voice breaking. "Thank you. Thank you for helping me." Angelina reached out, gently brushing a lock of hair from Sophia's face. "You don't have to thank me," she said, her heart aching for the child. "I'm just glad you're safe now." Sophia looked down at the basket of cakes, still clutched in her arms, as though the momentary lapse in tension had caused her to remember. I was just trying to make money," she said, her voice small and apologetic. "My aunt, she makes the cakes, and I sell them. I didn't want to cause any trouble." Angelina's heart broke at the girl's words. She had been trying to survive, trying to make it through the holiday season, despite everything that had happened to her. But Sophia wasn't alone anymore. "There's no need to apologize," Angelina said firmly. "You did nothing wrong. And now, I'm going to make sure you get the help you need. You're safe." As the police led the man away, Sophia turned to face the actress, her eyes filled with gratitude. But there was also something deeper there, a sense of connection that transcended their brief encounter. The bond between them, forged in that fleeting moment of fear and courage, was undeniable. Angelina stood up, her mind already racing with thoughts of what to do next. There was much to be done. She would make sure that Sophia's story was heard, that the help she needed was on the way. But for now, one thing was certain. This Christmas Eve would be the turning point in both of their lives. Sophia was not alone anymore. A new path forward. The scene at the market had shifted from chaos to an eerie calm. The once festive atmosphere now felt hollow as the last traces of the confrontation slowly dissipated. People who had witnessed the incident remained in clusters, their voices murmuring in low tones, exchanging what they had seen, unsure of the truth. The Christmas lights blinked on, unaffected by the drama that had unfolded just feet away. Angelina stood motionless for a moment, her thoughts racing. The last few minutes had felt like a whirlwind, one that had swept away the comfortable illusion she'd been living in. She had come to the market simply to experience a fleeting moment of normality, a break from the often isolating world of fame and expectation. But the reality she had encountered, the harsh, raw truth of Sophia's life, had shattered that illusion in the most profound way. Sophia, standing quietly next to the group of police officers, was looking up at the scene with wide eyes. Her small figure still trembled, the emotional aftershocks of the confrontation leaving her fragile and shaken. Angelina's protective instincts kicked in, and she walked towards the girl once more, her heart aching with empathy. "Sophia," she said gently, crouching down to the girl's level. "You're safe now. Everything will be okay." Sophia didn't speak immediately. She stood with her hands clasped tightly in front of her, her gaze flickering between the officers and the rest of the crowd, as if unsure of what would happen next. A slight shiver ran through her, and for a moment, the strength that had earlier defined her melted away, leaving only a vulnerable child in need of comfort. Angelina reached out and placed a hand gently on Sophia's shoulder. "You're not alone anymore," she said softly. "You don't have to be afraid." The girl looked up at her then, her eyes searching Angelina's face, as if she was trying to make sense of the kindness that was being extended to her. "But where will I go now?" she asked, her voice small but full of quiet despair. Angelina's heart clenched. She had expected many things: anger, fear, even resistance. But the loneliness in Sophia's voice struck her with unexpected force. This wasn't just about saving a child from an abusive situation. This was about giving her a chance at a life she deserved, one that was freed from fear and uncertainty. "I'll make sure you're taken care of," Angelina promised, her voice steady with resolve. "You'll be all right. I'm going to help you." The words felt important, not just for Sophia, but for Angelina herself. She had spent so much of her life advocating for children in need, yet this moment felt so much more personal. It wasn't just another cause, another story to be told. This was a real child, standing before her life in shambles because of circumstances beyond her control. And Angelina, at this moment, knew she had to do everything she could to change that. As the police officer spoke to the man who had called himself Sophia's father, the gravity of the situation deepened. The man's angry outbursts had led to his arrest, but it was clear from his wild demeanor that he wasn't working alone. There was something more to the story, something much darker than a simple case of parental abuse. The more Angelina thought about it, the more unsettling it became. There had been a note of urgency in the way the man had reacted, a hidden fear behind his anger. When he had looked at her, really looked at her, it was as though he feared what she might do, like she was an obstacle in his way. The way he had clung so tightly to Sophia and threatened her with such viciousness suggested that there was more at play than just a troubled father. This wasn't just about control, it was about something deeper, perhaps even criminal. Angelina's bodyguards had pulled away from the scene, keeping a respectful distance while the officers did their work. The atmosphere had calmed, but there was still a lingering tension. The crowd had started to disperse, but a few curious onlookers lingered, eyeing the police and the scene with a mixture of confusion and intrigue. "Sophia," Angelina said, drawing the girl's attention back to her. "I want you to know that I'm going to stay with you for as long as it takes. We're going to figure this out together." Sophia's eyes filled with tears once more, but this time, the tears weren't just from fear. There was a glimmer of hope in them, something that hadn't been there when she first met Angelina. The girl reached out slowly, her trembling hand touching Angelina's sleeve, as if unsure of her place in this world, now that the chaos was beginning to settle. "Thank you," Sophia whispered, her voice so quiet that Angelina had to lean in to hear her. "Thank you for not leaving me." Angelina didn't know how long they stood there, but in that moment, she made a silent vow to herself that she would never turn her back on this child. This wasn't just a chance encounter. This was fate. It was clear that Sophia needed her, and Angelina would be damned if she let this little girl slip through the cracks like so many others had before. Sophia was guided gently away from the scene by one of the officers, who had assured Angelina that the girl would be taken to a safe place until they could sort out the legalities. The officers had already begun to investigate the man's background, but Angelina could tell that they were still scratching the surface. There was much more to uncover. But for now, there was a pressing matter that needed her attention. The Christmas market, though still filled with holiday cheer, now felt like a backdrop to a much darker story. The glowing lights and cheerful decorations seemed hollow, as if they too had been exposed for the illusion they truly were. How many more children like Sophia were out there, struggling to survive in a world that had forgotten them? Angelina's thoughts turned to the life that Sophia had led up until now, the life she had endured alone. But now, that life was going to change. The girl would not go unnoticed. Angelina would make sure of it. There would be no more hiding in the shadows, no more being invisible to the world. With the urgency of the situation clear in her mind, Angelina made a decision. She needed to do more. She couldn't just walk away, not now. She had to get involved, to find out exactly what was happening, and to make sure that Sophia was never placed in a situation like this again. "Take me to the police station," Angelina said, her voice filled with new resolve. She turned to her assistant, who had been quiet for most of the evening, her face reflecting both frustration and concern. "I'll contact my foundation's legal team. We need to make sure that Sophia gets proper care. She can't just be sent into the system without proper oversight." Her assistant nodded, but the unease was evident. "Miss Jolie, the gala, your speech, it's almost time." "I know," Angelina replied, cutting her off. "But this is more important." The sound of sirens faded as they made their way through the streets of London, heading toward the police station. The weight of what was unfolding settled on her shoulders. As they neared the station, Angelina looked out the window, watching the twinkling lights of the city blink by. The season of Christmas, which had always been one of her favorite times of the year, now seemed to hold an entirely different meaning. She wasn't just celebrating the season. She was witnessing the reality that so many children like Sophia faced every single day. This holiday would never be the same again. And for that, she was grateful. It was in this moment, in the very heart of this crisis, that she knew her life would change forever. And this time, she wasn't going to let go. The path to change. As the limousine moved through the glowing streets of London, the soft hum of the engine did little to drown out the storm of thoughts swirling in Angelina's mind. The events of the past hour felt like a blur, but they were imprinted in her mind. Sophia's fear, her trembling hands, and the cold, harsh grip of the man who claimed to be her father. What she had witnessed in that Christmas market was more than just an abuse of power. It was a reminder that there were countless children in the world, like Sophia, whose voices were silenced by fear and neglect. Angelina's mind, always one to seek justice, now burned with the need to act. Her bodyguards sat quietly in the back, their professional demeanor reflecting their own unease. They had seen the confrontation escalate quickly, and although they respected her decisions, they knew the potential risks. The cold reality of the situation was clear. The dangers they faced on a daily basis weren't just about keeping a celebrity safe from paparazzi or overzealous fans. They were about keeping her out of harm's way in a world filled with darker forces. The thought of the situation spiraling out of control had their muscles tensed and their eyes ever watchful. But it wasn't fear that drove Angelina in this moment. It was something far deeper, a need to act, to make sure that no child, especially Sophia, was left behind, alone in a world that often overlooked them. As the limousine made its way toward the police station, Angelina's thoughts circled back to Sophia's brief words. "Thank you for not leaving me." The gratitude in the girl's voice had shaken her, as if Sophia had been waiting for someone to notice her, to pull her out of a life of fear and uncertainty. Angelina couldn't turn her back on her now, not after seeing the stark reality of Sophia's life. It wasn't just about one child, it was about thousands more like her. Children who lived in shadows, never seen by the world, and yet who needed saving just as much. Sophia is going to be all right, Angelina whispered to herself, trying to find reassurance in the uncertain sea of emotions within her. But she knew that this was only the beginning. She had to find out more, and she had to do it quickly. Her gut told her that what she had witnessed was only a small part of a larger, more sinister story. The man who had attacked Sophia, with his desperate and violent actions, wasn't just a broken father. He was part of a much bigger web, and Angelina was determined to uncover it. The ride to the police station felt longer than it should have. Each passing second, each turn the car made, brought her closer to the heart of the problem, and with it the weight of responsibility. She had always been an advocate for children, using her platform to fight for those without voices. But now it was personal. Sophia had become more than just a cause. She had become a living, breathing symbol of everything that needed to change in the world. The police station loomed ahead, its cold stone exterior standing as a silent reminder of the work yet to be done. When the limousine came to a stop, Angelina barely hesitated before stepping out, her heels clicking against the pavement. Her assistant, still visibly flustered, followed closely behind her, a look of concern etched on her face. "Miss Jolie," her assistant began, her voice strained with urgency. "I know you want to help, but the gala—" "I'm not going," Angelina cut her off. "There are more important things at stake right now. We'll reschedule the speech if necessary." Her assistant opened her mouth to protest, but quickly closed it, knowing better than to argue when Angelina had made up her mind. She quickly turned to make arrangements for the missed event, but there was a resigned air about her now. She understood why Angelina was doing this. Everyone did. The cause had become greater than any award or event. Inside the police station, the atmosphere was serious and businesslike. Officers moved briskly from one case to the next, their attention focused on the work at hand. It was a world of efficiency and order, yet it felt almost sterile compared to the emotional chaos that had unfolded just hours ago in the Christmas market. The warmth of the holidays seemed to evaporate in the cold concrete halls of the station, where problems were dealt with in black and white, far from the colorful lights and festive spirit that had once filled the streets. Angelina was led to a small, sterile office where she met with the lead officer in charge of the case. He was a no-nonsense type, his face hard with the weight of years in law enforcement. His name tag read Detective Brown. "Miss Jolie," Detective Brown greeted her, offering a firm handshake. "I appreciate your involvement, but I have to warn you that this situation is more complex than it seems." "I know," Angelina said, her voice steady. "I've seen enough to understand that. I need to know everything about that man, Sophia's so-called father." The detective's eyes narrowed slightly as he took a seat behind the desk. "We've already started investigating. His name is Jacob Miles, and he's known to law enforcement. We've had previous reports about him, but nothing that would lead to an arrest, until now." "What kind of reports?" Angelina pressed, leaning forward, her hands clasped in front of her. "Domestic disturbances, mostly," Brown replied, his fingers drumming lightly on the desk. "He's had run-ins with the authorities before, but he's always managed to slip through the cracks. There were no clear charges, no evidence that could link him to anything serious. Until today, of course. This incident, well, it's a game changer." Angelina felt a chill run through her. It wasn't just a case of an abusive father who had lost control. It was a pattern, a history of violent behavior that had gone unnoticed, ignored, and now had escalated to something that demanded attention, something far darker than anyone had realized. "What about Sophia?" Angelina asked, her voice softening as she thought of the child. "Where is she now? Is she in protective custody?" "She's in a safe house," Detective Brown said. "We've already contacted social services, and they're working with the authorities to make sure she's placed in a safe environment." But he paused, clearly struggling with what he was about to say. "There's something else we need to talk about." Angelina leaned in. "What do you mean?" "There's a bigger network at play here. Sophia's father, Jacob Miles, isn't working alone. We have reason to believe that he's part of a much larger operation. There are reports from other jurisdictions that suggest he might be involved in child trafficking, possibly even running a ring of children who are being exploited and used in various illegal activities." Angelina's breath caught in her throat. Child trafficking. The words felt like they didn't belong in the same sentence as the Christmas lights and decorations she had seen only hours before. It was a reality that she knew existed in the world, but to hear it so directly, so clearly, made her stomach churn. "Are you sure?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "We're still gathering evidence," Detective Brown confirmed, his tone grim. "But there are connections. Children who have gone missing, children who show up in the wrong places. We're trying to connect the dots. But Miles is just a small piece of a much bigger puzzle." Angelina's mind raced. This wasn't just about Sophia anymore. It was about saving countless other children who were being held in the same shadows. "How can I help?" she asked, her voice steady with newfound determination. "What can I do?" Detective Brown looked at her, his expression softening just slightly. "Your name carries weight, Miss Jolie. The attention you bring can help us expose this network. We need the public to understand the urgency of this. If we go public with this, the pressure will force them to slip up. If there are more children out there, if Sophia is not the only one, this is our chance to put a stop to it." Angelina nodded, her heart pounding. This was the moment. Everything had led to this point. She wasn't just going to be a bystander in this story. She was going to be a catalyst for change. For Sophia. For every child out there who had been silenced. "I'm in," she said, her voice unwavering. "Let's expose this." As Detective Brown made the necessary arrangements to contact the media, Angelina's mind flashed back to the girl's face. The same face that had looked up at her with so much fear and so much hope. A simple act of kindness had turned her world upside down. And now, it was time to give Sophia and children like her the life they deserved. It was a dangerous game they were about to play, but there was no turning back now. The echo of a silent cry. The quiet hum of the police station was a stark contrast to the emotional whirlwind that had consumed Angelina since she stepped out of the limousine at the Christmas market. As Detective Brown moved through the necessary procedures, arranging for the press release and securing the appropriate legal channels to get the story out, Angelina's thoughts never left Sophia. She could still see the child's trembling hands, the wide, fearful eyes, and the raw desperation that had marked every moment of their brief encounter. It was as if the weight of the world had been placed on that little girl's small shoulders, and for a brief moment, Angelina had felt that weight too. But as the detective handed her a cup of coffee, the steam curling up into the sterile air of the room, she realized this wasn't just a personal mission. This was something far bigger than she could have anticipated. The path ahead was unclear, and the stakes higher than ever. This wasn't just a single act of abuse. It was part of something much more sinister, something that spanned much further than she could have imagined. "Sophia is safe for now," Detective Brown had reassured her earlier, but that had done little to ease the anxiety building inside her chest. The fact that the girl had been placed in a safe house didn't calm her fears. It only made her wonder how many other children were out there, hidden in the shadows, waiting for someone to see them, waiting for someone to fight for them. Angelina knew that finding those children and giving them a voice was no longer just a distant cause. It was an immediate need. The urgency in her heart now drove her forward with a fierce determination that she had never known. She had lived much of her life with a desire to help, to make a difference on a global scale, but this felt different. Sophia's story was no longer abstract. It was tangible. It was real. And it was a story that needed to be told. More than that, it needed to be stopped. The trafficking ring that had likely been operating in the shadows for years, the one that had swept Sophia into its net, had to be exposed. Angelina turned to the window, gazing out at the dimming skyline of London, her reflection merging with the lights of the city. The clock was ticking. The press was waiting. The world was watching. But beneath the floodlights of media attention lay an even greater reality. A world that had to be made aware of the horrors occurring right under their noses. The detective's voice pulled her out of her thoughts. "We got some more information. It's not much, but it's a start." He handed her a folder, his expression grim. She opened it, her eyes scanning the papers inside. There were names, photographs, addresses, every scrap of information the police had gathered so far on Jacob Miles and his connections. The more she read, the more her stomach churned. There were numerous reports linking Miles to a network of human traffickers operating in several countries, but it was the pattern in the documents that struck her most. The children, taken from disadvantaged areas, often from single-parent households or foster care. Their names, like those of so many others, were lost to the system, forgotten. One name in particular caught her attention. A girl who had gone missing under suspicious circumstances, a girl whose story seemed to echo Sophia's. The similarities were chilling. "Detective, how many children are we talking about here?" Angelina asked, her voice quiet but determined. "It's too soon to say," he replied, his tone low. "But we're finding links to several disappearances. The problem is, Miles was just a cog in the machine. There's a bigger operation. We suspect that this network is international, and it's been under our radar for far too long." Angelina felt her pulse quicken. This wasn't a matter of stopping one abuser. This was an entire syndicate, a criminal organization that preyed on the most vulnerable members of society. But there was hope. There was always hope. With the right amount of pressure, with the right people behind it, this network could be dismantled. "I want to help," she said firmly. "What do you need from me?" Brown gave her a measured look, as though weighing his options. "We need to mobilize quickly. The press is going to be crucial to putting pressure on this. But we also need your foundation's resources, legal help, investigators, contacts who can move quickly. We can't just sit on this." Angelina nodded. Her foundation had always focused on human rights, on education, on fighting poverty. But this was different. This was life and death. This was a battle she was ready to fight with everything she had. She had no more time to waste. Her team would mobilize immediately. The detective stood and walked to his desk, pulling up a list of potential contacts for her. As he handed her a piece of paper, his voice grew serious. "Angelina, you're going to be under a lot of scrutiny. The media will want details, and the more we release, the more attention we'll attract. But we need to be careful. This is not just about one arrest. It's about uncovering a global operation, and the people involved won't stop. If they think they're being exposed, they'll do whatever it takes to cover their tracks." "I understand," Angelina said, her voice calm, though she could feel the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. This was not going to be easy. In fact, it would be one of the hardest things she had ever done. But there was no turning back now. As she left the station, she could already feel the tension of the situation pressing in on her. She wasn't just a celebrity anymore. She wasn't just an advocate. She was about to become the face of a movement, one that would fight to end the exploitation of children, one that would rip apart the veil of silence surrounding human trafficking, and one that would make sure no more children like Sophia were lost to the shadows. She glanced at her phone. It was nearly time for her to make the first of many calls, the calls that would start the avalanche of change. But as she held the phone in her hand, she couldn't help but think of Sofia again. She could still hear the girl's soft voice, her quiet cry for help. And she knew that she couldn't rest until the girl, and every child like her, was free. It wasn't long before Angelina's foundation began its work. Lawyers, investigators, and contacts from all over the globe were brought in. The network they were about to uncover was vast, stretching across borders, exploiting the most vulnerable. Angelina and her team had only one goal: to shut it down, to free every child being forced to live in the shadows. The media storm, once a distant possibility, was now a reality. Angelina knew that every step she took would be under the microscope. The more she exposed, the more dangerous the situation would become. But this wasn't about her. It was about those children. Their voices were silenced for far too long. Now, it was time for them to be heard. As the days passed, the investigation grew larger, and the pieces of the puzzle began to fit together. More and more children were rescued, pulled from the darkness of the human trafficking network that had ensnared them. The operation was slowly dismantled, piece by piece, and then came the day when they finally arrested the masterminds behind it all. The names on the list, the ones that had seemed so far away at first, were now in handcuffs, facing justice. The world watched as the arrests were made, and the media began to tell the stories of the children who had been saved. Sofia was among those children. She was safe now, and though the scars of her past would take time to heal, she had a future, one filled with possibilities she had never imagined. And it was all because one person refused to look the other way. As for Angelina, her work wasn't over. There were still too many children, too many stories, left untold. But as she watched Sofia smile for the first time since they had met, she knew that this was only the beginning. The fight for justice was far from over, but the ripple of change had already begun. And for that, she was grateful. The world had been shaken, but it was also being rebuilt, one life at a time. The weight of truth, the relentless pursuit of justice, had taken a toll on Angelina in ways she hadn't anticipated. The media storm that followed her public involvement in exposing the human trafficking ring was both overwhelming and necessary. Headlines were dominated by her courage, by her unyielding commitment to uncovering the truth behind the shadowy network that had silently harmed so many children, including Sofia. But beneath the public triumphs and the praise from her peers lay a growing fatigue, an emotional exhaustion that was starting to wear her down. She had always known that the world wasn't as simple as it appeared through the lens of fame, but now, standing at the epicenter of this battle, the reality felt more complicated than ever. The interviews, the press conferences, the constant questions. "I'll make the calls," Angelina said, her decision made. "I'll bring in the best people we have. We're not stopping until this is over." Days turned into weeks, and the investigation continued to unfold at a dizzying pace. Detective Brown and his team had begun to unravel the extent of the corruption, but each new revelation only seemed to lead to more questions. The people they were uncovering, the names they were connecting to the trafficking ring, were part of a network so entrenched, so deeply woven into the fabric of society, that it seemed impossible to believe. High-ranking officials, law enforcement officers, wealthy individuals, these were the people who had protected the operation, covered its tracks, and ensured its survival. They were the gatekeepers of a broken system, people who had ignored the suffering of the most vulnerable in exchange for power, money, and influence. The realization was both horrifying and infuriating, but there was no turning back now. Angelina, along with her legal and investigative team, had been working tirelessly to gather information, connect the dots, and prepare for the day when the full truth would be exposed. She had called in favors from allies across the globe, individuals who had the resources and the courage to stand up to the corrupt powers at play. Lawyers, journalists, and human rights activists all rallied to the cause, their names becoming part of the movement that had started with one child, one Christmas Eve, and one moment of intervention. Sophia's story had become a symbol, one that could not be ignored. It wasn't just the story of a little girl who had been rescued. It was the story of every child who had suffered in silence, of every broken system that had failed them. The world was watching now, and with the eyes of the media focused on the investigation, the pressure was mounting on those involved. The network was starting to crack. But even as the walls closed in on those who had perpetuated the trafficking, there was still the looming threat of retaliation. Sophia's rescue had been just the beginning, but with each new piece of the puzzle, the stakes grew higher. The criminals involved weren't just going to hand over their empire without a fight, and those who were complicit would stop at nothing to protect themselves. Angelina felt the weight of this truth bearing down on her. The closer they got to the heart of the operation, the more dangerous it became. But there was no room for fear. Not now. Not when so many children's futures depended on the outcome of this investigation. She thought of Sophia again, the girl who had trusted her, the girl who had believed in her, even when the world had shown her nothing but fear and cruelty. There was still so much work to be done, but one thing was clear. Sophia's rescue was just the beginning. There were many more children, countless more lives, that needed to be saved. And this time, there would be no more hiding in the shadows. Angelina stood in the center of her office, staring at the photos pinned to the wall, the faces of the children who had been saved, the ones still waiting, and the names of the people who were responsible for their suffering. She took a deep breath and exhaled slowly, gathering herself for what lay ahead. The fight was far from over, but she was ready. She had made a promise to Sophia, and she would see it through. The path was unclear, the challenges immense, but one thing was certain: there was no turning back. Not now. Not when they were so close to bringing down the people who had caused so much pain. As the phone rang on her desk, the reality of the moment hit her again. The world had taken notice, and now the fight would reach its climax. The final battle was coming. And this time, it wasn't just about exposing the criminals. It was about securing a future for the children they had nearly destroyed. Breaking the chains. The days that followed were an endless blur of meetings, strategy sessions, and legal maneuvering. Angelina, her legal team, and law enforcement had been working tirelessly, their focus singular: expose the truth, dismantle the network, and ensure that the people behind it all would be held accountable. As the pressure mounted, so did the stakes. The deeper they dug, the more intricate the web of corruption became, and the more dangerous the people involved showed themselves to be. Sophia had become a symbol, a living testament to the power of one person's refusal to ignore injustice. Her story had sparked a global conversation about the realities of human trafficking, and as the investigation progressed, more and more children were rescued. Yet with each victory, the shadows of the people pulling the strings grew darker, more elusive. Angelina knew they couldn't stop now, not with so many innocent lives still at risk. At the same time, there was something deeply personal about the fight for justice. The guilt that had haunted Angelina since she met Sophia, the guilt of not being able to do more sooner, had turned into a driving force. She couldn't just stop at exposing the traffickers. She had to ensure that the system would change, that children like Sophia would never again be forced to live in fear. The work was exhausting, emotionally draining, and at times, she had to remind herself why she was pushing forward. One quiet evening, several weeks after the media storm had quieted, Angelina found herself in her office at the foundation, staring at the collection of photos and documents pinned to the wall. The photos of the children, faces full of hope and innocence, were now more than just faces. They were lives she had pledged to protect. And with each name, she crossed off the list. The path forward seemed clearer. But then, as the lights of the office flickered on, a knock at the door startled her from her thoughts. It was late, far later than she usually worked. She opened the door to find her assistant standing in the hallway, holding a thick folder and a solemn expression on her face. "Miss July," her assistant said, stepping into the room. "We have new developments. It's bigger than we thought. Angelina sat up, her heart racing in anticipation. The investigation had been dragging on for months, and each lead had felt like a dead end. But this was different. She could sense it. "What is it?" she asked, her voice tight with urgency. Her assistant handed over the folder, and as Angelina opened it, she felt a chill run down her spine. Inside were documents, official-looking reports, flight manifests, and bank records. The names on these records were not just low-level criminals. They were political figures, business leaders, and even law enforcement officials, all with ties to the human trafficking ring that had been operating under their noses for years. This wasn't just about one group of criminals. It was an entire network of powerful people, pulling the strings from the highest levels of society. "This is the breakthrough we've been waiting for," the assistant said quietly. "We have enough evidence now to implicate some of the most influential people in the country. The problem is, exposing this could send shockwaves through the system." Angelina's hand trembled slightly as she held the folder. "Are we ready?" "Not yet," her assistant replied. "But we need to move quickly. These people know we're getting close, and we can't risk them disappearing before we make our move." Angelina's mind raced. This was the moment she had feared, but also prepared for. The battle was no longer just about saving Sophia or even rescuing the other children who had been trapped in the network. This was about dismantling a system that had allowed such horrors to exist for so long. The decision was clear. "We go public," Angelina said firmly. "We expose this, but we need to control the narrative. We need to make sure the public sees the full scope of what's happening, that they understand the depth of this network and the people behind it. We'll need all the media contacts we have, and we'll need to coordinate with law enforcement." Her assistant nodded, her expression a mixture of caution and resolve. "I'll start making the calls. We'll need to be strategic, though. The people involved won't just back down. They'll fight back." The days that followed were a whirlwind of activity. Angelina and her team worked around the clock to coordinate the release of the information. Journalists, lawyers, and activists all came together, their shared goal of exposing the truth, driving them forward. But as the plans began to take shape, the weight of what they were about to do became even more apparent. This wasn't just about a press release. This wasn't just about making headlines. It was about ensuring that the truth could no longer be ignored. The people involved were powerful, and they had spent years building a system designed to protect them. Angelina knew that exposing them would come at a great cost, but she also knew that there was no turning back. The moment the world knew what had been happening, everything would change. As the media began to receive the first leak of information, the world's attention turned to the investigation. The press picked up on the story quickly, and within hours, the scandal exploded across news outlets. Names of high-profile individuals were released, and shockwaves rippled through the political and business worlds. The story was everywhere. People couldn't look away. It was a tipping point, a moment when the world had no choice but to see the truth. But the fight didn't end there. The public's reaction was swift and brutal. Protests erupted across the globe, with people demanding justice for the children who had been trapped in the trafficking ring. As the investigation unfolded, more survivors came forward, their voices breaking through the silence that had kept them hidden for so long. The power of one child's story had sparked an international movement, and it was clear that things would never be the same. But the danger hadn't passed. As the investigation gained traction, the people involved in the network fought back, using their wealth and influence to try to discredit the findings. Threats were made, intimidation tactics used. The legal team working alongside law enforcement began receiving anonymous threats. It was clear that those who had been exposed would stop at nothing to protect themselves. Angelina knew that the fight was far from over. The walls of corruption had been cracked, but there was still so much more to be done. The people involved had too much to lose, and as the pressure mounted, they would do whatever it took to stay in power. The next few months would be critical. But as the faces of the children who had been saved flashed through her mind, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. She would see this through, no matter what it took. The final blow came when one of the key figures in the trafficking network, a powerful politician who had been implicated in the scandal, was arrested in a dramatic takedown. The moment the authorities stormed his estate, the media was there, cameras rolling as he was led away in handcuffs. The public was stunned. The justice system had failed for so long, but now, the power of the people, the power of truth, had finally prevailed. Sophia's face appeared on the news that night, her story now part of a larger narrative that spanned continents. The girl who had once been invisible was now a symbol of courage, resilience, and hope for millions. It was a bittersweet victory. The children had been saved, but the scars of what they had endured would take years to heal. Angelina stood at the front of a press conference, flanked by survivors, child advocacy groups, and legal teams. As the questions flew at her, her heart swelled with pride and sorrow. She had fought for this moment, but it had come at a great cost. "There's still more work to be done," Angelina said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "This fight doesn't end here. We will continue to fight for those who have no voice, for those who have been lost in the shadows. But today, we take a step forward. Today, we break the chains." The crowd erupted into applause, and as the cameras flashed, Angelina knew that the world was watching. The change had begun, and this time, it would be permanent.